Hello, and welcome back to the Diogenes Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Willingham, and together we will chew our way through Wokistan in search of an honest man, or woman, or they, them. I'm just kidding. There's nothing honest about any of that. Today we have part 2 of Artemis Unbound, an examination of the ongoing process of cultural feminization and the identitarian revisionism that is unraveling Western narratives and hollowing out our truth-seeking and sense-making institutions. In part 1, we ended with a discussion of the feminist revisionary translation of the Odyssey by classy activist and clitorary critic, say that 10 times fast, Emily Wilson, and how her treatment of Homer's epic couldn't find its way home, but is coming soon to a theater near you as a hollow effigy stuffed with Trojan Horsethems. And speaking of getting stuffed with Trojans, we also got hot and bothered learning from contusicologist Susan McClary that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy, is all about violent rape, which, according to Mary Sue, makes it the perfect soundtrack to Western civilization. Now, without further ado, Part 2. Don't stop till you get enough. Ketanji Brown Jackson, who refused to define what a woman is during her confirmation hearing for the Supreme Court on the grounds that she is not a biologist, and who also compared banning sex changes for children to banning interracial marriages, took a star turn on Broadway in a play entitled And Juliet. Romeo who? Jackson's walk-on line, delivered with gyno gusto, is, quote, female empowerment. Sick, end quote. Is that sick in the British sense? This is the Bard, after all. Spoiler, Romeo still dies. I guess not every bit of history needs revising, but Juliet lives and runs off with a non-binary character to form a love triangle. For real. And an impressively subtle disruption of the fourth wall, too, letting us know what it's all really about. This insipid ideological confection has more of the syrup bottle than Shakespeare about it. Despite a minor background in drama, KBJ's is clearly a token role, a brand name saccharin add-on to help the medicine go down. How come you taste so good? This may apply to her other identitarian performances as well. Consider that Harvard, KBJ's alma mater, has acknowledged that based on academic qualifications alone, blacks would comprise 0.7% of student admissions. That's less than 1%. As it stands today, blacks comprise roughly 10% of admissions at Harvard. That's 14.285714 times the number of qualified black students, for readers and listeners who aren't numerate or don't own a calculator. And blacks require only a 78% score on the mathematics SAT, that's a mediocre flat C for elite colleges, while Asian students are required to have a 93% score or above. That's a solid A. Isn't that sweet? I'm just going to go out on a limb and suggest that KBJ, Joy Reid, another Harvard alum, and many other arboreal ascendants of their ilk, and by this I mean gray matter, not skin color, don't really have the skills to climb these heights without a huge social boost. I don't think George W. Bush deserved to be monkeying around at Yale and Harvard either, although his documented resemblance to a chimp is indisputably cute. The problem is that as all of this dead weight continues to accumulate at the top, they're going to pull down the whole tree in their fall. Let's just hope that too much doesn't accumulate around Los Angeles, what with the frequent wildfires. Speaking of which, the black female mayor of LA, Karen Bass, vacationed in Ghana during the catastrophic wildfires after campaigning on the promise not to leave the state during her term, knowing full well of the risks beforehand and having slashed fire department budgets by $17 million, money used to push through DEI hiring and training initiatives, including hiring more women firefighters. Persistently questioned about the wisdom and efficacy of these policies upon her return, she was catatonically unresponsive. At a later press conference, Mayor Bass showed further incompetence in her misdirections for fire victims. Quote, "Right now, if you need help, emergency information, resources, and shelter is available. All of this can be found at URL," end quote. This is criminally stupid. And it comes from a woman who, like the water in Los Angeles, was absent when most needed, and who excused herself by saying she took the fastest route home possible. I guess it's a good thing her pilot knows the difference between LAX and URL, otherwise she might be circling forever in that high and mighty. Fireproofing in a geographical area scoured by the Santa Ana winds and nature made for combustion is clearly less important than blowing rainbow bubbles for the LA bureaucracy. This is evident in the conspicuous identity pandering and pontificating of their hires. Kristen Crowley was appointed fire chief of the LAFD in 2022, quote, with her wife and children by her side, becoming the first female and LGBTQ plus fire chief in the LAFD. Cool, I guess, if she can still carry firefighter equipment while dragging around all those extra letters. In her bio, it is explained that Crowley, quote, leads a diverse department, creating, supporting, and promoting a culture that values diversity, inclusion, and equity, while striving to meet and exceed the expectations of the communities, which are Chief Crowley's priorities, end quote. In her own words, she states, quote, so, by creating this new bureau, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau, now we actually have the staff to do the work when it comes to doing a deep dive in regard to how we do business, how we take care of one another, end quote. Can I get some croutons with that word salad? Actually, kebabs might be better for roasting in the embers of a fire that consumed more than 57,500 acres. That's 90 square miles in and around the City of Angels. Diversity may be refreshing, but quenching it is not. Christine Larson, the proud brown and out lesbian deputy fire chief of the LAFD and head of the Equity and Human Resources Bureau, boasted of replacing white males with diverse, non-cis heteronormative folks. That's folks with an X, because, as she says, people in distress prefer to be rescued by people who look like them. Does this mean the rescuers are on fire too? Quote, you want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease knowing that someone might understand their situation better, end quote. She spat incendiary disdain herself when engaging the hypothetical question of what would happen if she, as a woman, could not physically pull a man out of a fire. Quote, is she strong enough to do this? Or, you couldn't pull my husband out of a fire, to which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire, end quote. Larson certainly sprays her misandrist victim blaming at full blast, begging the question of what handling that hose is really all about. By the way, I'm using loaded language and double entendres to make a point. If you're going to smite people with identity jargon, you'd better be prepared to defend yourself against it too. As Shakespeare wrote, these violent delights have violent ends. That's from the real Romeo and Juliet, Act 2, Scene 6. Unlike the DEI mob, I do not judge people based on immutable characteristics or sexual preferences, but I will judge them on their competencies or lack thereof, and by the extent to which reason and good faith are absent or present in their thoughts and actions. If critical social justice warriors are going to use identity to justify their ideology, then I will delve 1 yard below their minds and blow them at the fucking moon. That's paraphrased from Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 4. While we're in the flaming intersectional neighborhood of Identitopia, slam poetaster Frequency runs the voodoo down in a viral TEDx performance of her piece, Dear White People. Quote, Dear white people, I don't even know where to start. In between my busy schedule, comprised entirely of surviving white America, there is simply no time to write letters. Besides, any letter I'd write would most likely bring tears to your eyes, and I, for one, have had my fill of white tears. There are days when I think you aren't worth my ink, that your whiteness is draining me of too much energy. Can't give you a taste of the tea for fear you'll colonize the whole kitchen. End quote. From County Cullen to Langston Hughes to Gil Scott-Heron, we get this? This is not poetry. This is artless vomit, a pyroclastic flow of entitlements snaking through a murky stew of ejected fast food grievances. Her bio says it all, and then some, because, don't miss it, she's important. Quote, Mwende Frequency Katawiwa is a 26-year-old immigrant queer woman, that's spelled W-O-M-Y-N, speaker and performer. A 2017 TED Women speaker and ranked third at the 2015 Individual World Poetry Slam, Frequency is an internationally touring author, host, youth worker, social justice lecturer, teaching artist, and workshop leader who has spent her life at the intersection of arts, education, and activism. An award-winning poet/speaker, she and/or her work in reproductive justice, Black Lives Matter organizing, LGBTQ+ advocacy, and poetry have been featured on Upworthy, OK Africa, TEDx, The New York Times, For Harriet, Teen Vogue, The Huffington Post, Everyday Feminism, and other outlets. Frequency is a founding member of the New Orleans Black Youth Project, a founding member of the New Orleans Youth Open Mic, festival coordinator with the New Orleans Youth Poetry Festival, a blogger with the Afro fashion and culture blog Noirlinians, and a member of Wild Seeds, the New Orleans Octavia Butler Emergent Strategy Collective. She currently works as a community organizer at Women with a Vision, as well as running the Young Women with a Vision program, end quote. No wonder she has no time for whites. Her rep inflation sounds exhausting, like dysentery. Then again, ideological incontinence is a special frequency. Speaking of binging and purging, pair this with Quetzala Carson's TEDx talk from 2017, Pedagogy of the Decolonizing. Quote, and by the way, don't feel bad if you can't follow this. Quote, a periodic Naquan cabinet at Landman, our work at New Toka Column 86, Dynamica Mezqua Skygun Camera Mode, that lying Blackfoot Crane Eco DeSoto Amati, Letso Kamati bless all our relations, I'm from Anahawk, that's my motherland, on You Got Our Territory, I'm a C6, my name is Quetzala, I'm grateful to be with all of you here today, in a Misquita sky, gun the motherland, and the gathering lands of the Blackfoot, the Cree, the Dakota, the DeSoto, and the Métis nations, end quote. This hairball of unpunctuated vowels and consonants is the actual YouTube transcript of the introduction from Carson's talk, which was delivered rapid fire in an indeterminate language by someone who repeatedly ran out of breath walking across the 6-foot circular orange rug on the stage. I know that fat is now an identity, but I never realized that COPD was an ethnicity. And while white privilege is undoubtedly clouding my memory, I did ace half a dozen courses in Native North American and Mesoamerican art history, taught by my advisor, a female archaeologist no less, and I just cannot recall a single thing about the Gobbledygook tribe. The introduction was, of course, a land acknowledgement, that phatic mantra, emphasis on the fat, employed by the woke to signal their virtue, guilt, or malice, depending upon the orifice doing the talking. Carson goes on in rather more intelligible English to comment on how all in attendance are there only as a result of broken treaties, and then to berate them for not being able to correctly pronounce, bear with me, I've been practicing, Amisquachi Waskahikan, which seems a bit unfair since she is obviously an ethno-sesquipedalian, the back half of this term meaning someone who uses big words, jargon, and rarefied language to sound special or impressive. Add in the exotic place names and phrases of non-Western cultures, and everything sounds like a magical musical incantation, the kind that would have held me spellbound in my youth, wreathed in incense and sensimilla smoke while reading Carlos Castaneda and listening to Santana's Abraxas. All of this does make some sense, since Quetzala Carson is, quote, a mestizex from Manahoac, Nicaragua, who spent her summers in Managua and her winters in, let me try it again, Amisquachi Waskahikan, and who, as a musician, has released an album entitled Mecayotl Tlazokamati Asha Kamochipa. What makes even more sense is that she was, quote, raised by 2 special needs educators, end quote. Quetzala Carson's rain on your parade dance diatribe is, by her own admission, intended, quote, to make everybody uncomfortable, end quote, a strategy she arrived at through consultation that very morning with a they-them friend who was one of the, quote, most prayerful people, end quote, she knows, and with whom she conducted an indigenous-only decolonization class at Standing Rock. Prayerful, as in praying for rain. Again, this is not education, and these are definitely not ideas worth spreading as the TED cult touts its mission, more like indoctrination by mind virus. After intending discomfort, she then says, quote, panic is not prayerful, end quote. Somebody better tell Emily Wilson, and relates how a, quote, displaced urban indigenous security guard, end quote, with obviously internalized oppression, had questioned her in the lobby before her talk, not knowing she was an actual speaker. And speak she does, when she can draw a heavily labored breath, sounding her barbaric yawls and repetitive pseudo-words like uncomfortability several times each in seconds. Giving credit where it's due, Frequency's message was equally horrible, but her oratory was excellent. Carson's mission is to combat colonial violence and to use teaching and music as platforms from which to, quote, communally discuss and transmute trauma, end quote. Her musical work is, quote, heavily influenced by indigenous studies and my time on the front lines, end quote. The front lines of what is not specified, but if I had to guess, I would say the all-you-can-eat buffet at the Golden Corral or its Canadian counterpart. Again, I am employing cutting jokes, not out of malice, but to make Quetzala's meat easier to chew, and to make a point. So many woke activists and left liberal radicals are demonstrably self-obsessed, lost in the mythic past, and obviously physically and mentally unhealthy. They are also intentionally unattractive, or dare I say, unappetizing. They hypocritically preach diversity and inclusion while attacking their perceived opponents on the basis of identity or divergent views. The growing, pun intended, mania around fat shaming is especially absurd and dangerous. Note, I wrote this essay before the Ozempic craze. BMI may be a faulty metric for the fit and the muscular, but we all know what obesity looks like and what it leads to. And obesity rates are disproportionately high for Indians and Latinos, and this woman hardly looks or sounds deprived. Quite the opposite. If Carson is going to use criticism as a condiment and roast whites for taking too much, she should consider her own foraging habits before it's too late. I recommend that she prioritize cutting empty carbs over purging white colonizers, and I sincerely wish her good health, especially mentally. Quetzala Carson is the head of the Native Studies Students Association at the University of Alberta, where she, quote, organizes with students towards decolonial futures, end quote, which would seem to me to entail an uncoupling from all aspects of white Western settler colonialism, necessarily including all epistemic and technological advancements since at least the Industrial Revolution, along with constitutional governance. So, pick up where you left off with your Neolithism and your internecine tribal slaughters, and good luck with that. As Oscar Wilde put it, quote, some cause happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go, end quote. Quetzala may be many things, but the bluebird of happiness is not one of them. Pop culture abounds with examples of girl boss warrior geniuses toppling and displacing male protagonists at every turn. The Jedi super prodigy Rey fixes the notoriously unreliable Millennium Falcon and outflies Han Solo with zero experience. Not missing a trick, she bests the emo wannabe Dark Lord Kylo Ren at his own mind games, exploiting his insecurities, and later makes him love her for it. She outclasses Grandmaster Skywalker, knocking him on his ass and levitating a mountain of boulders with essentially no training, ultimately necessitating that Luke, the now misanthropic hermit who somehow lost his redemptive hope and mojo between the trilogies, is forced to give up the ghost. With no heroic arc or struggle whatsoever, Rey becomes the living embodiment of all the Jedi, putting down once and for all the evil emperor that never seems to die, and then claims the Skywalker title for herself, signifying her unlimited potential. Well, as Kathleen Kennedy and her coven have proudly proclaimed, the farce is female. And don't you forget it. Now, as Luke Skywalker might well have said, make me one with everything. Wise and luminous elf queen Galadriel in Amazon's, how perfect, Rings of Power Not a Fan fiction, becomes an insufferable and unstoppable sword-wielding badass, slaying trolls, swimming oceans, and challenging and seducing the future Lord of the Rings himself in an embarrassing parody that is as far removed from Tolkien as Karen Carpenter is from Andrea Dworkin, aka the feminist food pyramid. In the novels, the beneficent Lady of Lothlorien offers Frodo and the Fellowship a guiding light for the dark places when all other lights go out. The Amazon Queen shouts down her friends and allies when they question the wisdom of her actions. You have not seen what I have seen. Spoken like a true narcissist. Well, Lady G did have a magic mirror. I guess she saw that the future is female. In the MCU, Shuri, top scientist in the hidden African nation of Wakanda, out-savants Bruce Banner and Tony Stark to solve a problem they inadvertently created in a bid to save the world, and eventually steps into the catsuit to become the new Black Panther after the sad and untimely real-life death of the excellent Chadwick Boseman. Self-proclaimed strongest Avenger and washed-rind fromage Brie Larson suits up as a photonic marvel of moral superiority, and every other kind, on screen and in interviews, proving that bitch really is a superpower, one matched in this case by her equally impressive defensiveness. And in the third Thor installment, Love and Thunder, a black Valkyrie is king of Asgard, now a fishing village, which seems a bit too on the nose. Natalie Portman as Femme Thor is the worthy wielder of the broken Mjolnir, now reformed just for her, and the real Odin's son, one of the most powerful heroes in Marvel, is reduced to beefcake comic relief, stripped naked in Omnipotent City, and ultimately required to imbue a diverse band of children with his power to help defeat the God Butcher. Talk about cold cuts. In the end, Thor becomes the adoptive father of Love, the daughter of the repentant, no, I got it right the first time, the slain daughter of the repentant villain who, resurrected by eternity, wields Thor's weapons and seems poised to outclass him in the near future. If this is Valhalla, just leave me to rot on the battlefield. As for the inedible She-Hulk, a twerking attorney who repeatedly woke scolds and humbles the smart Hulk version of the storied Jade Giant, making the case that even the most integrated form of male strength and intelligence is laughable by comparison, this just makes me green around the gills. Nuff said. One last example is hysterically laughable, emphasis on the hystera, which is Greek for uterus. Quote, "Give it to them! What are they trying to take?" End quote, shrieks Mia Magic, a leader of the popular rage ritual workshops for women, where disaffected bourgeois maenads bash sticks against the ground until their arms give out, while screaming at the tops of their lungs for $4,000 a weekend, $6,500 plus airfare if you want to do it in France for an authentic wine and cheese experience. Brie Larson sold separately. Mamma Mia femsplains why middle-class, mostly white ladies' conniption is all the rage. Quote, "Rage has been demonized and villainized, especially in the feminine. But our sacred rage has been what has incited so many movements, created so much change on our planet. It is imperative that we allow ourselves safe spaces to release this fiery hot emotion from within us so that it can no longer poison or toxify our internal emotional reality. Even though a volcano can be destructive in its eruption, ultimately that is what creates." End quote. Okay. Apropos of Cluster B catharsis workshops, she said the quiet part out loud. Women's rage has fueled many ideological crusades over the last century and a half. Spooning with Marxism and scissoring into the twisted sisters of the critical race grift, The furies of postmodern feminism have perfected parthenogenesis and spawned the woke-topus, a multi-armed abomination made in the image of their malice. See the forthcoming Where the Woke Things Are, a Bestiary by the Diogenes Project for a complete illustrated description of this and other ideological monstrosities. Details to come soon. Notice that she claims the right to safety even while acknowledging that the feelings she traffics in are toxic and poisonous. This is exactly what BLM rioters, urban looters, and bellicose campus leftists in endless social media interviews demonstrate. A self-righteous entitlement to rage, abuse, steal, and destroy in the name of social justice with zero accountability. Just like the Columbia University students who complained during their sit-in that campus food services weren't showing up to feed them during their vacuous bit of political theater. This isn't equity or justice of any kind, but pure narcissism and sociopathy. And what is the opposite of an internal emotional reality, the one that Mamma Mia spoke of? An external social fantasy, one in which we are all now expected to comply with the identitarian ideological demands of these screaming memes. If, as the therapeutic cliche goes, depression is rage turned inward, then these externalized hostilities are much less about improving the world than remaking it in the image of a mass formation psychosis shared and perpetuated by anhedonic radical activists. Ms. Magic enthusiastically greets attendees in a New Age retreat space replete with crystals, feathers, and paisley fabric-draped altars with the obligatory Hindu statuary. She said she was a magic mama, and she could throw a mean tarot, and carried on without a comma, that she was someone I should know. That's Frank Zappa Camarillo Brillo from Overnight Sensation in 1973. Rage ritual dominatrix Kimberly Helmus claims that, quote, when people do this and give themselves permission to release their anger, their capacity for joy actually expands, end quote. Right. And Orwell in 1984 said, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Helmus's assertion begs the question, with all this extravagantly expressed hostility on the left, why aren't we seeing massive spikes in reported joy? The demands of woke cultural socialists have been renorming our institutions for decades, so surely Ellen Page should have perked up by now. Oh wait, she cut them off. Zappa had insight on this as well. Quote, there are more love songs than anything else. If songs could make you do something, we'd all love one another, end quote. I suspect that with happiness, much like suicide, women may be attempting it more often than men, but still are not succeeding at the same rate. Try harder, ladies, we believe in you. And whichever strategy proves more successful, we'll all be better off. And no, I'm not recommending self-harm for anyone. That would make me a trans advocate. I'm just releasing a fiery hot emotion in pursuit of expanding joy. And as Frank correctly noted, songs and satirical critique don't have the power to make people do crazy things, and crazy people seldom need a reason anyhow. This brings us to a crucial set of concerning facts. Firstly, that women, especially in Gen Z, are by far the largest and the fastest growing demographic of mentally ill people in the country, with skyrocketing levels of anxiety, depression, and correlational gender dysphoria, and you can't blame it on Trump. And since when have emotional dysregulation and performative tantrums been effective tools for social change? Thoreau went to the woods to live deliberately and suck out all the marrow of life, right down the road from his friend Emerson's house where he frequently had supper. His act of civil disobedience was a passive protest, a principled gesture that inspired Gandhi and MLK, who also weren't the unstained saints they are often taken for, despite leading important civil rights movements. But screaming and swinging cudgels among the trees seems more the speed of the wild women of woke. No restorative Arcadian refuge, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely, that it should come to this. That's Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 2. None of these examples are about enhancing our appreciation of great works of art, nor are they in any way edifying, uplifting, or illuminating the human condition, nor are they any fucking fun. Instead, these projects, as the authors, performers, and commentators zealously proclaim, are an intentional, focused attack on the values and the masculinity that are foundational to our civilization. This is not even criticism. It is radical activism, of a kind less political than pathological. Motivated by reckless spite, the women who hold these positions are driving the cultural narrative the way Phaeton steered the chariot of the sun, careening wildly out of control and prepared to pridefully set the world on fire to prove their superior worth. The Greek myth ended with Zeus striking the hapless youth with lightning, which begs the question, what deus ex machina will end the wayward sister's career through the fog and filthy air where fair is foul and foul is fair? That's Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 1. Controversial feminist academic and social critic Camille Paglia, in a presentation of her book, Free Women, Free Men, Sex, Gender, and Feminism, argues that women are long past having a warrant for blaming men for their lack of social status or personal flourishing. Quote, women are well launched now. This reflex, snide put-downs of men, has got to stop, end quote. She continues, quote, upper middle-class women are very unhappy even though they have achieved a certain status. The unhappiness is due, I believe, to huge systemic changes. For thousands of years, women had their own worlds, and the sexes didn't have that much to do with each other. This is a brand new experiment, to have this new system where women can be economically independent and they're working side by side with men in the workplace, end quote. This parallel play metaphor is insightful because it has long been well observed by developmental psychologists that boys and girls from infancy and toddlerhood onwards do not pay attention or engage with objects and other children in the same ways or with the same social goals. To wit, quote, what women have lost is the old solidarity that they once had when they totally ruled the private sphere. Women's life all day long was mostly with other women, multi-generational, as well as the children. It was a huge tribal experience. And what women are feeling now is a sense of isolation, loneliness, and disconnection from their old function, end quote. Far from being an argument that women should be barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen, Paglia is simply pointing out that these former roles are inherently meaningful and were culturally defining for so long that their dramatic reduction in less than a century has created a vacuum and a backlash that isn't good for anyone, especially women. Quote, I'm not saying go back. I'm saying stop blaming men, end quote. Paglia also notes that traditionally sexed social roles may have limited independent thought up to a point in history, but they also mitigated against anxious and unnecessary identity quests, which increasingly vitiate common sense. Joyce Benenson, Harvard lecturer in evolutionary biology and professor of psychology at Emmanuel College, has shown that women are just as aggressive as men, but operate according to quote-unquote scramble competition, maneuvering covertly to outcompete their rivals. She describes women as being more territorial and status conscious than men, who may envy their competitors' successes but also find them incentivizing, while women are more likely to respond negatively and engage in behind-the-scenes social sabotage rather than in stepping up their game. Sound familiar? Of course, given women's now outsized roles in the production of cultural narratives, where they are both behind and in front of the camera in manuscripts, we can hardly call this hidden. Self-styled reactionary feminist and author of Feminism Against Progress, Mary Harrington has taken dead-eye aim at the gynocratic gambits of the authoritarian woke left. She notes that Western civilization has devolved into, quote, office politics in the female key, end quote, which she has described as, quote, free women complaining about a lack of freedom, end quote, and utilizing the strategies of character assassination, whisper campaigns, and ostracism to cancel out competitors and gain social control. Quote, It stands to reason that the more women there are in public life, the more we will see female typical forms of aggression in public life, end quote, she says. Yes, now almost exclusively. And the more the culture will seethe and pulsate with spite, malice, and self-loathing, as its institutions are eaten away from the inside, as if by the demon fetus that post-pink pill feminists seem to fear and loathe so much. Harrington also concurs with Polly's assessment of the destabilizing effects of identity quests and the now rampant inculcation of nonconformity, as she puts it, which she sees as a function of a kind of quote-unquote secular eschatology, that is, a frenzied drive toward revolutionary progress that historically tends to lead less to liberté, égalité, fraternité than to the reign of terror. Elsewhere, Harrington notes that this cultural upsurge in gynocratic identity politics has led not just to a renorming of society, but a great unnorming, a cyclonic assault on values, institutions, and epistemic categories themselves in a raging pursuit of personal power at any cost. Research shows that women consistently score higher in neuroticism and negative emotions than men, and these results come from large cross-cultural studies. Significantly, this difference between the sexes is larger in cultures with greater gender equity, like the US and the West generally. Quote, in more gender egalitarian nations, sex differences in neuroticism are larger, not smaller, as would be expected if sex differences come only from gender roles, gendered socialization, and patriarchy, end quote. It is also true that in the most egalitarian Western nations, such as the Scandinavian countries, men and women tend to self-sort back into traditionally gendered occupations, perhaps as a way of ameliorating the psychological effects of normlessness, and certainly as a result of strong social safety nets, which allow individuals to choose occupations more in line with their actual interests. It seems the Nordic types are so progressive they've circled back to common sense. Men and women generally are different, and this is complementary, not antagonistic. We should at least spare a thought for the possibility that a wholesale abandonment or exchange of social roles and responsibilities, many of which are predicated on evolved attributes and skill sets, might be emotionally dysregulating and socially destabilizing, especially when occurring rapidly in the culture. Here is an abbreviated list of contemporary social problems that correlate with female social dominance. A comprehensive analysis is beyond the scope of this writing and will be explored in a future publication by the Diogenes Project. Minority women are less likely than white women to use birth control. The homeless, school shooters, rapists, and violent criminals overwhelmingly come from single-mother homes. Divorce is overwhelmingly initiated by women. No-fault divorce privileges women and increases the number of broken families with adverse consequences for children and for society. Mothers are overwhelmingly more likely than fathers to trans their children. Mothers who trans their children are more likely to be mentally ill. Women are more likely to regard family as either obstacles to or vehicles for social justice. Women receive more lenient sentences and consequences for illegal and socially maladaptive behavior. Female sex crimes with minors are increasing. Women are more likely to regard cultural norms and institutions as structured and operating against their best interests and those of minorities generally. Quote, feminism was never about equality, end quote, says Janice Fiamingo, author and former professor of English at the University of Ottawa, in a comprehensive series of video essays on the myths and realities of feminist history. Fiamingo references the reasonable criticism of contemporary feminist practice by writer Hannah Nabintu Herland, who observes that early forms of suffrage were built on reason and later devolved into rage. Herland writes, quote, the early women's movement fought for equal socio-political rights and respected the differences between the sexes. Because this early movement was based on constructive realism rather than ideology, it produced better results. We did not witness the breakdown of the family in its aftermath. Marriage did not turn into a war zone. This type of feminism did not produce raging women who hate men, end quote. Fiamengo applauds the observations that feminism needn't be unreasonable and antipathetic to men, and that it now operates as an especially toxic force in the culture, but she challenges Herland's rosy perception that its origins were somehow purer. She points out that while the welfare state and the pill accelerated the mass breakdown of the family as a social unit, the spiteful divisiveness that drives contemporary feminism and its auto-reproductive ideological offspring wokeism was in fact there from the beginning. Fiamengo says, quote, "The early women's movement not only produced raging women who hated men and made that hatred a central part of their ideology, it was largely conceived and promoted by such women who consistently misrepresented women's social position. Although then, as now, there were reasonable women in the movement, its founders often declared their hatred explicitly," end quote. Fiamengo offers the foundational example of the Declaration of Sentiments of 1848, written by feminist matriarch Elizabeth Cady Stanton. What emotion but hatred, Fiamengo asks, was meant to be evoked by the document's central thesis? Quote, this is the Declaration of Sentiments. "The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpation on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. He, man, has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life," end quote. Written at a time when women's colleges were well established, and many women had respected and flourishing careers as authors, scholars, educators, and businesswomen, Stanton's claims seem motivated more by malice than the material reality, and were confounded by the fact that a large number of the Declaration's signatories were men, giving the lie to the assertion of a uniform male tyranny. This document is considered the beginning of the women's rights movement in America and has shaped its development down to the present. Fiamengo concludes, therefore, that both women and men have, quote, "approved public expressions of fanatical anti-male animus," end quote. I agree. And the ascendancy of women in all areas of knowledge and cultural production, as well as law, medicine, therapy, politics, and the corporate world, demonstrates continuous and accelerating gains over the last nearly 2 centuries. But progressives don't really like progress. It cancels out their need to cancel someone, contradicts their insistence that all disparities in outcome are due to bias and bigotry, and it disrupts their will to dismantle institutions which, because they remain imperfect, can never be good enough. Proclaiming that the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house, the woke have carried out a hostile takeover and have institutionalized a gaslighting ideology that, in the case of fourth-wave feminism, seems less concerned with securing the rights of women than with endlessly punishing the putative wrongs of men. This concludes Part 2 of Artemis Unbound. The third and final part of this essay has already been uploaded to the podcast and is entitled From Shakespeare to Scientific American: Why Do Women Hate the White Western Male? Readers and listeners, old and new, may wish to check that out right now, along with all our additional content, sure to stimulate your amusement and your acrimony. Remember, if you enjoy the content on the Diogenes podcast, please like and subscribe and tell your friends to join the pack. Share your thoughts in the comments section, but do so respectfully. We believe in free speech here at the Diogenes podcast, but slurs are not arguments, and trolling is not a meaningful contribution to discourse. Besides, that's my fucking job. I'm Chris. Thanks for joining me.